Porpoising was a big talking point of the first pre-season Formula 1 test in Barcelona, with everyone afflicted by it to a greater or lesser extent. But the team that seemed least concerned about the situation was McLaren. While teams like Alfa Romeo suffered damage thanks to porpoising, and Ferrari produced some of the most eye-catching footage of the test thanks to Charles Leclerc bouncing down the main straight before changes were made to mitigate the problem, it was relatively smooth sailing for McLaren. Thanks to the sharp eye of our technical expert Gary Anderson, and the artificially created wet running on the final day of the test, we can see at least some of the reason why McLaren was in such good shape compared to its rivals. And if we've noticed, you can guarantee that rival teams will have spotted exactly the same thing. So what did McLaren get so right? And what does it tell us about the development direction others will need to go in to solve their own porpoising problems? Porpoising is caused by the underfloor aero stalling, leading to the rear of the car losing aero load and rising, followed by the front, then the process starting all over again as the aero starts working again, lowering the car and then stalling again. In extreme cases, this can cause a sequence of troubling oscillations. It's a result of some aspect of the underfloor aero stalling at ultra low ride heights at high speeds in these new ground effect F1 cars. Simulating the problem is difficult without on-track running, given the impossibility of running at ultra-low ride heights at high speeds in the wind tunnel, and the fact that CFD's accuracy is reduced when very close to the ground. One of the countermeasures teams have adopted to manage the porpoising is increasing the ride height. But although McLaren did have to make some minor setup tweaks and removed some development items that did lead to porpoising, it appears to have a car that was already less dependent on running ultra-low ride heights. It appears to have eliminated the porpoising problem thanks to how powerful the vortices running down the side of the underfloor are. Photos of the car running in the wet, which we have inverted to make the airflow more obvious, show clear, pronounced vortices in this area. These seal the low pressure area from the outside world and, by being more energetic than those produced by McLaren's rivals, make the floor less prone to stalling. In F1's first ground effect era, porpoising was a regular problem with the ultra-low side skirts. But with sealing the underfloor with vortices something that has been vital in F1 in recent years, McLaren appears to have taken that knowledge and airflow control to create what might be called virtual skirts. Not only does this improve the sealing of the underfloor, it will also allow McLaren to keep the floor slightly clear of the track surface. By doing this, you can reduce the risk of porpoising by having that cushion of air between the sides of the floor and the track surface. Fortunately, the wet running creates spray and allows us to see exactly what is happening aerodynamically both on and off the car's surface. You can see this cushion by the darker section that runs horizontally at ground level at the bottom of the spiral. This shows there is more water in the vortex as it pulls airflow out from underneath the car. Note also the airflow coming off the outer rear corner of the bargeboard area that is now carried upwards and over the top of the floor vortices. This will also be because of the power of the vortices, and it will help to keep them powerful as they travel further rearward. So how is McLaren achieving this? A look at the detail of its floor, which is handily made clear by the use of FlowViz paint, reveals some important details. The front section of the McLaren floor is higher than the minimum permitted by the rules. We can see the end of the internal leading edge turning vanes, so this gives it more volume of flow coming out of this section of the floor. This, plus the small vertical vane, will help set up the powerful vortices we see in the wet running picture. The small separated wing section halfway along the floor and the intake area near the rear tyre are part of what allows McLaren to have stronger and more consistent vortices travelling down the side of the car. The result is an underfloor that is both not running too low and that is sealed more effectively than its rivals. We'll take a look at what McLaren's opposition is doing in comparison in a moment. But first, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to our channel so you never miss anything from the race. And if you enjoy this video, hit the like button, as that really does help us to keep doing what we do. McLaren's advantage in this area is made crystal clear by a comparison with its rivals. The Mercedes does not have vortices that are as powerful, meaning the W13 has to run nearer to the ground. This makes it very sensitive to ride height and whether or not the underfloor is sealed. If the floor touches the ground, the diffuser stalls, which reduces the load and allows the car to rise up. Then you can have the bouncing problem. Mercedes added a small stay at the rear corner of its floor to ensure there is no flexing in that area, causing a problem. Red Bull probably has the second best control over the vortices, especially at the front area of the floor, but then they fall over and don't continue along the floor edge. This is either because Red Bull doesn't have a small separated wing section to allow the vortices to develop, or because the car is very low to the ground and the vortices don't have enough energy in the flow to maintain them. Like Mercedes, Red Bull is trying to get the best performance from the underfloor by sealing it mechanically. Ferrari doesn't rely so much on vortices being set up by the front corner of the floor, but more on the power of the flow being pulled into the Coke bottle area by the turning vanes mounted on the inside of the rear brake ducts. In the early part of testing, Ferrari had some porpoising issues, but seemed to get on top of it fairly quickly. It introduced a modified floor, which had some detail changes along the outer edge to reduce the flat surface area near the ground. The larger the sealing surface, the more sensitive to the changing gap as the ride height lowers. For all teams, it's easy enough to create vortices with modifications to get an effect more like that achieved by McLaren. But doing so to integrate with the rest of the airflow structures of the car is a far bigger challenge. McLaren went well in the Barcelona test, but just because it appears to have done a good job with sealing the underfloor with vortices, it doesn't automatically mean it has the strongest car. McLaren was third fastest overall thanks to Lando Norris, with a time set on the first day of running using C4 Pirellis. That was a brisk time, but we don't have a direct comparison of its pace compared to the other leading teams. Inevitably, everyone, McLaren included, is playing down their form at the moment, and it won't be until the Bahrain test that we get a clearer idea of the lie of the land in terms of form. But McLaren could have an advantage if it really is ahead of the game in terms of avoiding porpoising. While managing the problem is easy, you can simply raise the ride height, doing so without sacrificing performance is the problem. And while others might be planning bigger changes to the floor and ride height for the next test, McLaren just might be able to focus its energies on improving the car rather than changing the way it works. Unfortunately, we are desperately unlikely to get wet conditions in Bahrain to have a look at whether rivals make gains in this area. But on the evidence of Barcelona, McLaren has at least made a strong start in adapting to F1's new ground effect era. The question now is how effectively the rest can adapt their cars either to run without losing performance at higher ride heights or replicate the mastery of the vortices that McLaren has exhibited. All teams plan to bring new parts to the test, some of them to tackle this problem. But with just 12 days between the first and second test, then the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix following soon after, time is short for anyone who needs to get on top of porpoising problems, as well as McLaren appears to have done.